Let me read to you a passage from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 9, verse 14 to 17. It's the Gospel for Saturday of the 13th week of Ordinary Time. St. Matthew writes, "Then John's disciples came and asked him, 'How is it that we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?' Jesus answered, 'How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them still? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunken cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do men pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved." That's from Matthew chapter 9, verse 14 to 17. Our Lord speaks of himself as new wine in new wineskins. What does this suggest to us? Well, the beginnings of anything significant are often full of interest. The beginnings are a major theme in the myths and rituals of religions, including indigenous religions, such as the Aboriginal religions of Australia. The beginnings of a great empire, such as the Roman, are most interesting and often become mythical. For instance, there are the myths of Romulus and Remus, who featured in Diocles of Peparethus's History of Rome, on which Fabius and Plutarch relied. There are the myths of the Aeneid, a Latin epic poem written by Virgil between 29 and 19 BC. It tells the legendary story of Aeneas, a character in the Iliad, a Trojan who travelled to Italy, where he became the ancestor of the Romans. Numerous developments in history have contributed significantly to the life and culture of mankind, and religious developments must be considered as being at their forefront. These too had their beginnings. Buddhism had its beginning, as did Zoroastrianism, as did Hinduism and Islam. But the most significant thing that has ever happened on the face of the earth, in view of what it led to, was the call of Abraham some 3,800 years ago. This was a great beginning. The Creator and Lord of heaven and earth, the one whom the religions of mankind strove to know without realizing it, intervened and spoke to a humble migrant from Mesopotamia, then living in Haran. He told Abraham that he had a plan which would bring special blessings to all the families of the earth, and Abraham and his descendants were chosen to be part of that plan. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 to 4, and Genesis chapter 17, verse 1. Abraham accepted this choice and determined to follow in faith and obedience the God who had deigned to reveal himself to him. This was the beginning, and it flowered into a great religion which transcended the religions of man because it was a true and not a merely mythical revelation. Great as were the insights of the Greeks, their tradition could not rival the loftiness of the divine inspiration of the Hebrew religion. Its moral insight, its conception of the deity, its awful imperativeness with tremendous sanctions, its expectation of a grand blessing to come, all of this dwarfed the Greek treasures when it came to the power to shape life. But the classical Hebrew religion of Abraham, Moses, and the prophets was not a standalone phenomenon, complete in itself. From its beginning, it looked to a fulfillment. Its purpose was to produce a great flower, which would be the aroma to pervade all creation and to give to man his lustre. That flower and that shoot was Jesus Christ. The fulfillment of all that God had begun was Christ. But this fulfillment was far more than was ever expected. And this is because the long-awaited and long-predicted Messiah was not just a most extraordinary priest or prophet or king. He did not just transcend in human qualities all great individuals who had gone before him or who were to follow him. He was not just the greatest of the sons of men. The essence of his utter uniqueness and the touchstone of the Christian faith was his divinity. He was and is God, while being truly man. As the Father said from the bright cloud on the mountain, to him thenceforth all were to listen. He is the God of the Old Testament, the same God who revealed himself to Abraham. He said in the Gospel of St. John, Abraham saw my day and was glad. The response, you are not yet 50 years old and you have seen Abraham? Our Lord's response to that, I tell you, before Abraham ever was, I am. He is the God who revealed himself to Moses, David, and the prophets. We read in the prophets, for example, Hosea, how God describes himself as the husband of his chosen people, and how his people are unfaithful to him. Accordingly, in our gospel passage I read earlier, from Matthew chapter 9, verse 14 to 17, Jesus Christ describes himself as the bridegroom who is now with them. How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them. Then they will fast. This claim to divinity, to being equal to God, is a mind-boggling claim, an astounding revelation, and it is the key step in the acceptance of all the mysteries of Christian dogma. But there is more. To say that Jesus Christ, the fulfillment of all the prophecies, is God, is not to say, as might be presumed, that it is only he, Jesus Christ, who is the one and only God who revealed himself to Abraham and the prophets. He is indeed the one and only God, but he is not the only person who is this. He is the second person of three divine persons, each of whom is the one and only God of Abraham and the prophets. Who could ever have thought this up? A bunch of but moderately educated fishermen in a backwater of the Roman Empire? The height and depth of the Christian system, so startling and so utterly beautiful, so complete an answer to the predicament of man and the world, so intellectually consistent and yet so far above in its mysteries the powers of human reason, and so remarkably a fulfillment of the Old Testament, could only have come from above. The beginning of the revealed religion of Abraham and the Hebrew prophets is to be located in the act of God. It was his work, and it was destined to be fulfilled in a great blessing for all the families of the earth, as we read in Genesis 12. The bestowal of this blessing was the supreme act of God, and in the event it far transcended the prophecies. The blessing was the incarnate Son of God who began to dwell among us as God with us. Every heavenly blessing is to be found in him, and he is our hope of glory, as St. Paul writes. We enter into God's kingdom by becoming loving and obedient disciples of Christ. This is what life is about, and it is this which is life and light for the whole world. It is as simple and as demanding as that. We know where Jesus Christ is to be found and how access to him is to be attained. He is found in his body, the church, the Church Catholic in union with the successor of St. Peter, and all the treasures of life in Christ are to be appropriated there.